Back at it here on the Kauffman Corner podcast, a very special edition of the Kauffman Corner podcast as the good Dr. Rany Jazayerli, just giddy. He's just giddy and excited to talk analytics and numbers. Of course, Rany, his Baseball Prospectus days, we got a chance to welcome Dr. Daniel Mack, the Vice President and Assistant General Manager for Research and Development for the Kansas City Royals. We're going to talk about how he got into this business, his background, his degree. Was he always focused on baseball? The Royals' attention to the different numbers on base percentages is it growing? How do you teach players to be more selective? Where have the Royals made the most progress? How has the game changed since Daniel's been in the analytics game for Major League Baseball? How do you reverse engineer what other teams are doing? Free agency, the draft, what's the role analytics plays there? Where are analytics going in baseball? We talk about it right now here on the Kauffman Corner podcast.
You're listening to Kauffman Corner, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kauffman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kauffman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gan Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at ganasphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gan Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here's your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
Thank you, Curtis. Back at it here on a Sunday on the Kauffman Corner podcast. Of course, you heard. Proudly brought to you by our friends at Gan Asphalt and Concrete, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. And Doctor discussion today, Dr. Rany Jazayerli.
I'm so excited to speak to another doctor, Soren. This is
I know, as you should be. And contain yourself. Listen, I'm just going to ask one thing before we welcome in our guest here. Is like, don't try to out-nerd or outnumber or outstat. It's not a competition, Rany. Okay, it's a discussion to try to draw out some of the great intellect and intelligence that Daniel Mack is going to bring to the show. Okay, so just settle.
Are you just afraid that Dr. Mack and I are going to have a discussion that you're not going to understand at all? Is that what you're saying, Soren?
There's a little bit of that. Yeah, I know I am the dumbest guy in the room based upon sheepskins, as well as I know Dr. Mack's schools of origin. It's quite prestigious. And the guy who's got the glorified liberal arts degree from Syracuse is definitely the dumbest guy in the room. But I will say this in my defense. I brought that up with Mitchell Schwartz when he came on our Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, he being a Cal grad. And he told me, there is an amount of intelligence that comes with knowing when you're the dumbest guy in the room. So I thought that was important. I showcased that.
And in your defense, you also have the largest audience of the three of us. So I think both Daniel and I need to be very nice to you.
Because the common man, he identifies with the other dunce, right? Like he doesn't identify with you geniuses. Let's welcome in our guest. We want to welcome to the Kauffman Corner podcast. As I said, the title is impressive. Dr. Daniel Mack, he is the Vice President and Assistant General Manager for Research and Development for the Kansas City Royals. Daniel, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
It's good to talk. Daniel was one of the keynote speakers at a baseball analytics presentation, I'll call it, at the Linda Hall Library, which is a beautiful, wonderful place here in Kansas City, a research library here in Kansas City. And I did my show down there, and I got to talk to Daniel. I got to talk to Brian Kenny. Brian Kenny, and then our buddy from Baseball Reference.
Sean Foreman.
No, yes. And you think I'd remember? I should have written this down. I should have remembered it. But it was one of the coolest nights and days for me was getting to talk with all you guys and really get more of a background to it. But just getting to know you, Daniel. You're the mystery man. Like people right now are like, oh my God. He's a real guy. We weren't sure. We thought he might be Oz. He might be the guy behind the curtain. There's a real Daniel Mack is real. We have living, breathing proof right here.
Yeah, I don't think OpenAI has gotten there yet, so I'm pretty sure I'm a real person.
And he has a sense of humor too. This is blowing people's minds right now.
Yes. We had a lot of fun that afternoon and that evening, and it was a great discussion. I know they had a packed house and everybody loved it. Give us a little bit the background. Your academic career includes some of the most prestigious institutions, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Where all did you go to school?
Well, I did my bachelor's at the University of Notre Dame. I got a degree in computer science. Took a lot of my math classes while I was there. Went and did my master's at Columbia, where I focused on machine learning and data mining. And then I finished my PhD at Vanderbilt, where it was essentially in data mining and machine learning, but it was a focus on fault diagnosis in aircraft engines. So kind of a nice little jaunt through the Midwest to New York City down to Nashville.
I like that. That's strong. The engines. It's kind of like that. I see the parallel there, right? Engines. You got something's got to drive the ship, right? Like
the difference is that if an engine fails, people die. So after doing that, I like to think baseball's a little less life and death. But I'm curious, Daniel, because you went kind of straight from doing your PhD and the focus with the airlines to I believe you did a dissertation also in the baseball realm with pitch data.
So you're right on. I was working on the sort of the algorithms to help find anomalous aircraft takeoffs, things that you don't want to have happen when you're on one of those planes. And my advisor was really happy with the work, but he kind of wanted to see if it could generalize, if I could use it with other data sets. And at the time, I had started to get into scraping the pitch FX data, by going back to 2008.
Sure.
And I thought, if we're looking for anomalous takeoffs, what if we look for anomalous starts and pitcher features? And he was a great guy and a great mentor of mine. Knew nothing about baseball. So it became a couple month journey where I got to teach him a lot about the sport, and we found anomalous starts, but they were almost always like perfect games. It was a lot of Tim Lincecum in there.
Okay.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Is that what drove you towards baseball? Is that what sent you down the road to making this your career? Like taking that skill set away from like a public or a mainstream usage and diving into baseball? Or was baseball always, in the back of your mind as or sports in general, maybe, as to where you would end up?
Baseball was a pretty big part of my life growing up. I think it was my grandfather's favorite sport. He was definitely the sporting figure in my life, and we watched a lot of games together. When I got to college and I started doing projects, you saw a lot of people doing the same projects, and I wanted to be creative. I wanted to do something different. And when you're in the computer science field, there aren't a whole lot of people that are focusing on sports data, or at least there weren't in like 2006. So it was kind of an awesome opportunity for me to find ways of getting to sports questions, baseball questions, really, more than anything else. I think one of the projects I did at Columbia was network theory. So looking at how people, sort of social network style concepts, but I was looking at the Mitchell report to see if you could figure out like who had done steroids.
Okay.
And that was kind of a fun project, and those sorts of things kept growing. It was just, I saw the dissertation as an opportunity to kind of make a statement with it. And I got very lucky that was also beginning in the winter of 2012, and the winter meetings were in Nashville. And Dan Brooks got me an opportunity to meet Mike Grootman, who had become the director of baseball analytics. And that kind of kicked that whole thing off for me. But I always tried to find a way to work on a sports project as a final semester project, because I just thought it gave me the opportunity to work on it without worrying about other people kind of trampling on my space.
Now, when you interviewed with the Royals, you mentioned Mike Groupman, who was sort of the director, but it was by my understanding, it was a very small department. It was him. It was, I believe, John Williams was also
Correct.
there. Was there anyone else in the department at that time? I mean, you look at the just the front office directory today for the Royals analytics department, and I'm seeing at least 6 names directly underneath your supervision. There may be more that I'm not identifying. I think a lot of Royals fans are unaware of just how many people work in the analytics department. Can you talk a little bit about just the growth of the Royals analytics over the last decade?
Absolutely. When Mike and John hired me, I was the first analyst. They hired one other person to be a data engineer, and that they picked a couple of interns, really great ones too. One of them went on to become the director of basketball analytics for the Nets, Glenn DuPaul. The other one, Guy Stevens, worked with us all the way through 2021, and both of them extremely brilliant guys. So it was 4 to 6, I guess, probably 4 full-time, the 2 interns. And that's been sort of a slow but steady growth. We broke the developer position into a couple of different people. We got lucky enough to bring on a couple of full-time analysts. Really, in the last couple years, we've exploded, where we turned into basically 6 analysts and 4 full-time developers, which is, once you start to get to work with that kind of bandwidth in terms of people, you get to really tackle a lot of specific problems. And now this offseason, we're going to take another kind of large jolt in hiring. I'm going to finish hiring a director of R&D to sort of be right underneath me to help direct the day-to-day. And we're probably going to add maybe 5 to 6 more analysts across things like pro player personnel, amateur scouting, probably a couple of hopefully even better PhD type people like myself. I mean, we're really trying to ramp things up.
When you say grow the bandwidth, like what do those extra people allow you to do? Is it, dig deeper on a certain topic? Is it to cover more topics? Like what does getting more manpower, because a lot of people be like, well, the computers do it all, right? Obviously not, right? Somebody's got to send the computers down that path. But what is that extra manpower? How would that reflect for the ball club, for the baseball fan that's maybe not a computer science major? Well, how are they going to see the results of having that extra manpower and that extra bandwidth?
Well, I think what it allows us to do is take some very core things that we've spent the last 5 to 10 years building and not only iterate and make them better, which is always the point, but to bring people around that information who can distribute it, get it into the hands of more decision makers. Our developers are 4 tremendous human beings that have helped build our internal portal. We're turning it over. We've made a bunch of improvements to it, and that gets a lot of data into our decision makers' hands. But when you have more analysts, it allows you to find new and exciting ways of taking that data and producing essentially new forms of communication that even get as far as to the players, which is a huge initiative for us as well, right? Is to make sure that our players are more included than they've ever been in how we view our organization and view them.
Now, along those lines of building out the R&D department, I mean, the Royals, made some pretty significant on-field personnel changes with last year, bringing in Matt Quattrero, who obviously came over from the Tampa Bay Rays, and Brian Sweeney from the Guardians, organizations that have a history of using data influencing their decisions. Have you seen a difference in the way that the on-field personnel are using the data, the amount of data they want from you? I selfishly, I'd like to hear that you and your department are having to do a lot more work than you used to, because there's a lot more demand for the kind of data that you can put out there, because they're actually paying attention to that stuff now.
Well, I think the way I would describe it is that our major league staff is extremely strong in how they want to utilize information, from Q to Paul Hoover, Brian Sweeney. Obviously, Alex Zumwalt was there before, who helped overhaul our hitting process that was much more data driven than it was before that. And I would say what we've gotten with this major league staff is a group that integrates more of that information in their day-to-day decision making, whether it's Brian Sweeney with Zach Bove and Mitch Stetter with one of our analysts, Brandon Nelson, where they collaborate and talk through pitch design. They talk through game planning. It's a constant conversation in that group. Obviously, like I said, Zumi and Keone and the hitting group are always looking for new information. We've brought more biomechanical information to them over the last season. And then you get to Q and Hoove, who are from the Tampa tradition, extremely interested in using data in their in-game decision-making. So I would say that what we've done is we've taken a lot of things that we had built and we were able to sort of flesh that out in a much more comprehensive fashion to the entire staff.
And on that, I'm really curious about the interaction with the players themselves, because my perception is that, if you go back 10 or certainly 20 years ago, most of the players on the field didn't want to hear about the data. They didn't, if somebody from a data department, which barely existed, let's say 20 years ago, wanted to talk to a player on the field about, what the data said about their performance, the players probably wouldn't give them the time of day. But the perception I see now is you see more and more players who are coming into to professional baseball already comfortable with that and see it as a resource to make them better. Since you joined the Royals, you've been there now 10 years, do you sense that the players are much more amenable to hearing about what the data says and using that to improve their performance? Do you have more face-to-face conversations with the players themselves in trying to make them better?
Absolutely. I would say if I think back in time, you're probably looking at 2018 or 2019 when those amateur classes really were the first ones that spent so much time in the off season at places like Driveline or Tread, Cressy, doing things where they were around a lot more data-driven mechanisms than they had ever been probably in their high school careers or even in a lot of college careers. And that accelerated that sort of data-driven concept into a lot of D1 colleges, right? A lot of TrackMan, there's a ton of TrackMan radars that capture pitch-by-pitch data in Division I. I mean, just a ton. And so when you surround players when they're 18 to 21 with data and they have success and they show up in pro ball, they want to still have access to the things that help them get to that point. And that, I think, broke down a lot of barriers in terms of what players were looking for. And the success of those young players, I think, has had an interesting effect on a lot of players that are in the middle age of their career, where they're watching people use this information to make themselves better. So now they use it for career longevity purposes. I think that's been probably one of the most satisfying parts of my career over the last couple of years, is having an opportunity to even have those conversations with the people that truly put it into action because they step out on the field, and it's helped build some incredible professional relationships. Our pitching staff, from Brady to Brady Singer to Daniel Lynch, Chris Bubich, I mean, that class of 18 is a very data-driven class. And then you couple in the hitters like Bobby and Vinny and MJ, like you have guys that are trying to use the information to help themselves on a daily basis. It really has created kind of a nice, easy flowing conversation from front office member to coach to player and so forth.
Yeah, people that were cultivated in that category, and that's got to be one of the biggest changes. We're talking to Daniel Mack, the Kansas City Royals, head of the analytics department. There, we're proudly brought to you by our friends at Gan Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor with free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Gan Asphalt keeps parking lots safer, helps you and your business focus on the business, avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find them online right now at ganasphalt.com. Where have the biggest strides been made since you've been in this business? It sounds like one of them is you don't have to be a salesman anymore, right? People are readily buying what's coming. That's clearly it, that the industry now recognizes and embraces it. But where have the biggest advances do you think that have been made overall industry-wide and maybe for the Royals specifically just in your time here?
Yeah, well, clearly the communication aspect has to be very near the top of that. My brain almost always just goes to technology, which probably says a little bit more about me, but the sheer aspect of the player tracking at the major league level that's gotten to the minor league level, means that you get a really incredible interaction between how you measure what a player is doing on the field, along with the live look evaluations that we've been getting from scouts for so many years, and understanding how those two things interplay in an even more compare and contrast style, I think is really allowing us to probably ask even better questions from scouts, which I think the industry has this ebb and flow relationship with. Probably maybe a little on brand for me to talk about scouts like that, but I really do think that, even from a purely selfish data driven perspective, like, I want the best models possible. The best models happen when you have live look information with them. That's about as clear as I can get from an empirical standpoint. So I think we've seen sort of the growth in player tracking technology actually sort of unlock more of what we want to ask from scouts. And then I think the last bit is probably the biomechanical information, the markerless motion capture, I think is a really fascinating new area.
With the proliferation of this, and you mentioned, like, now it's even in the minor leagues and the colleges, all this information's out there. Where do you get the edge, right? If everybody's got the same tool, how do you become a better craftsman? Like, what's the way to get the jump on, Tampa or Houston or whoever it is, if everybody has the same technology, the same numbers, the same views, and we should all be looking to draft the same player, right? We should be all looking to sign the same player, trade for the same guy. How do you glean an edge now with the proliferation of everything, not only just around the major leagues, but up and down the different levels of baseball?
Well, I do think the one thing I would take issue with there is the same view. Okay. And you can see this in the draft a lot, right? There are very data-driven teams where you can see their philosophies bear out over 10 picks, right? You can start to see certain teams that are very much, even from an analytics perspective, old school on what they look for in terms of college performance. And then you see teams that hunt spin rate and hunt certain types of velocity, or hunt good fastballs from a data perspective, don't care about breaking balls, and vice versa. You see those things kind of sort of flesh themselves out. And so really what it is we're getting all to the same data points. Our models are going to differ because our team philosophies are going to want us to hunt different concepts throughout the draft. And that's where you get to build models that hunt those things for you, help you find and understand the world. I'm a risk person at the end of the day. Like, I look at the world and I look at a lot of data through risk management, and blame aircraft takeoffs. But the bottom line there for me is, if we can build a model that looks that way, how do we interact with player development so that we give them players that they have the most opportunity to have success with? I think that's how a lot of teams are working in their pipelines at this point in the draft.
And now, Dan, the Royals, I think, certainly among fans, probably have a reputation of being behind the curve when it comes to analytics, and I think that reputation is outdated and probably unfair at this point. But I think the one flashpoint, which has been a hobby horse of mine for a generation now, has been the low walk rates at the major league. The Royals have drawn fewer walks than any other organization for the last 40 years. Really, I mean, this predates everybody in the organization. It's just the way the Royals have been, and it's something I bring up a lot on the show, just because I just once in my life I want to see a patient Royals team, and obviously there's more to baseball than just that. But I'm curious how the organization perceives plate discipline, on base percentage, and what the organization is doing to sort of prioritize that, or especially with the proliferation of data. Are there ways of determining which players are amenable to becoming more patient at the plate, or which player, or the techniques you can use to teach players to not swing at pitches out of the strike zone? So I'm curious what your role is in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you 100% in the sense that I'm an on-base percentage guy. I think that's a non-controversial take. But the concept of how you get to that, I think, is always what makes that interesting. We definitely have a few players on the team that have an entire career of being pretty close to free swingers. And they've had some success doing it too. So you're always fighting with being able to point to a platonic ideal that it's not always necessary. That being said, a lot of what we attempt to value does come down to basically a few different key indicators. One of them is chase rate. One of them is swing decisions. In the draft, we have a few different pieces of technology that we try to avail ourselves of that let us understand whether or not certain players have more of an innate skill at pitch tracking, right? That might give us a better opportunity to find guys who have the opportunity to chase less. I think a number of the hitters we've taken at different points, college hitters, sort of bear some of that out. I think guys like Vinny is a good example. I think, Nick Lofton has shown the ability to have good on base ability. We're definitely knowing what we want to look for. I think and we know that we want to look for we want to be able to not chase the ball. I mean, that's definitely not something that I think anyone in our organization is looking for. What you've got is, I think, a really interesting combination of players at different parts of their career that sometimes skew that for us in like the aggregate, if I'm being honest. But the bottom line is, we've gone into off seasons too, looking for on base, right? I think Carlos Santana is a great example of that too, where we've wanted to try and add some. Whether or not we've added enough, I think, is always going to be, is at least the last few years has borne out. We haven't added enough if we want on base to be a priority.
Where in the book Moneyball, right? To go back, that was the big jump to get things going. One of the chapters talks about how Billy Beane came to the conclusion that, if your walk rate, you are what you are once you leave high school, right? Like if you don't take pitches coming out of high school, then you're not going to take pitches in the beginning. You're not going to come up a free swinger and then suddenly be 100 walk guy. I ran that by Kevin Seitzer, who I'll bet is the last Royal to walk 100 times in a season. I ran it by him and I said, "Is that true?" And he said, "No, it was my freshman year of college that I really learned to take pitches and understand the strike zone and everything." So I've amended Moneyball to 19-ish, right? Like I'll give you a year because the Royals' most recent best walker was that. Is that true? I think, is there only so much you can do in that category? It's about, like you said, you mentioned chase rates and those things, but once they get to a certain age, are they who they are?
I think there are people who are very good at knowing the strike zone. I think there are people who in college attempt to game that concept by becoming exceptionally passive hitters, particularly guys that sometimes swing and miss a lot. Right. The whole point is the fewer times that you have people watch you swing and miss at a ball, the more likely it is that maybe you fix the problem. I think contact's probably something that's with you very early on in your career. That's unlikely to ever get better as competition improves. I think decision-making on some level can be pushed into extremes, but finding the Joey Vottos of the world that just inherently know the zone and don't chase out of it and swing when it's right in it, those guys appear and they don't really ever change. And you don't really ever see those guys magically appear all of a sudden in high A or double A.
Is that why the college hitter, I mean, like you mentioned risk aversion, right? Like, and the concept has always been that the college hitter is the safer hitter, but the upside is the hitter or pitcher is the college player. You got a better idea what they are because they're older and you've seen more there. And the high school player is the one where you're going to find more upside, but also more crashes. Is that even more pronounced today? Because I don't suppose every high school's got all this data out there. Is that even more true today?
Well, yeah. So let's amend risk aversion to risk management, right? Think about it like a portfolio. And actually, high school players tend to play a lot in summer showcases. Those are covered very heavily by data-driven measurement techniques at this point. So we're getting a lot better at understanding the risk of the high school player. The concept now is, given how few high school players can be drafted because of signing bonus situations, NIL situations, you're trying to figure out if you can pop one of those or a couple of those in certain circumstances to get high upside while being able to still mitigate risk by knowing how to wrap that around lower risk players. And I think that sometimes is a concept that is hard to look at from the outside because you're not seeing every team's board, right? So you can't see how they are also quantifying the upside / risk of that player. But that concept of risk management in the draft, or and portfolio building, is always something that like super appeals to me. It's why I've loved being a part of the draft basically my entire career.
And on that, you mentioned how just in the last 5 years we've seen players do things like go to outside, like to drive line and tread and Cressy. And this is certainly not a Royals only phenomenon. This is an industry-wide phenomenon of players trying to completely change who they are and add velocity and add new pitches, and there's a whole industry of making players better. And one of the things I feel it's done is it's completely broken the aging curve. Like it used to be that if a player came to the major leagues, if he was talented enough to make it when he was 21 years old, even if he wasn't very good, he was almost certainly going to become a superstar by the time he was 26, 27. Now sometimes you're seeing players that are 21, 22 in the major leagues and they never get better. Or you might see a player, the other side of that is like the Whit Merrifields of the world, where they don't even make it to the majors till they're 27. It used to be if you didn't reach the majors by the time you were 27, the best you could hope for is to be a fringe, contributor in the majors. And you see guys who don't make it till the mid to late 20s, but they made a change in their swing path. They completely overhauled the swing, and they're having very successful careers well into their 30s, or guys who were in the majors but middling players. You think of like Daniel Murphy or Justin Turner, guys like that who just remade themselves. How much is data involved in that? Like, how much is that something where your department can take a player who has talent but is sort of maybe maxed out who he is at the moment, and help him remake himself into a fundamentally different and better player?
Well, I think that comes down to a couple of different items, to different concepts. One of them is our ability to have really strong and powerful communication inside our player development system, right? Being able to identify players' weaknesses and strengths clearly so that they know how to work on those has become a lot more precise. And I think that's what's allowed a player like Whit, who learned to add strength to what was already a fairly appealing offensive profile in terms of contact and, reasonable swing decisions. Like that's what allowed him to propel him to being able to hit for a better average, being able to hit for a little bit of power and get him to the show. The other aspect of that is pitch design, which happens at a much earlier age, for better or for worse. I'm sure there's lots of people who have an opinion on that, but as you mentioned, the 21, 22-year-olds that are moving quickly through a system, it's because they've already had so many people in the off seasons while they were developing and in season, helping them already craft a repertoire that's ready to get out major league hitters. And teams are super hungry for pitching depth to begin with, which means that if you're healthy, you have stuff and you can attack, they're ready to add you to the roster. So I think the data-driven aspects for that have both helped improve the odds of a player who's off by one or two key performance indicators, and conversely has helped pitchers that would have spent years honing what their repertoire needed to look like to be successful. They get to work on it much earlier in their careers, which helps them command it a little better or attack different zones better. And you get to see them kind of go after it real quick.
Rany's talked about this. We've never seen him throw harder, but throw fewer fastballs, right? Like that's one of the big things we see, that the velocity is higher than it's ever been. That's obviously driven by guys like you that are like, okay, these are the things that are important, and they get people out, and guys being willing to throw those pitches. When you're out there looking for players, like it used to be tools, right? We'd hear about tools. Now it's more specific than that. Is it we can build velocity no matter what? That was one of the things Rany was talking about last week. Find a guy who can throw strikes and we can add velocity. What are the key things that you look for that you say, okay, he's got this. We got to have this, and we can add this over here?
Well, you're always looking for a key strength from the pitching perspective, right? Whether it's a single pitch that they already have, or in certain circumstances, it's raw resources, right? That's how I think about spin rate a lot, right? It's not necessarily that they're applying it in a way that's effective to them, but they have it. And obviously there was a certain amount of time at the major league level in particular where even if you didn't have it, you found a way to get it. And, we're probably in a much more murkier point with that regardless. But those are the things that you would be looking for to try and say, hey, there's something we can do here. And this is where the bandwidth point that we started part of the conversation with, in terms of analysts and in terms of the front office or major league staff with folks like Brian and Zach and Mitch, there's more people asking these questions and proposing solutions than there's ever been, which gives us the opportunity to do things like find and help James MacArthur, right? Who obviously had just an excellent end of the year. That's a win all the way around, I think, in our organization, from player development to the major league staff to help from R&D. And it was fun watching him, close out the Astros before they knew what happened.
I'd asked you to spend an hour just talking about that if I thought there was any chance you would tell us proprietary secrets. But yes, the James MacArthur renaissance was definitely eye-opening, I think, for us, that whatever's going on in the organization right now, we're starting to see those tangible results.
I think there's a lot of good communication that we were having at the very beginning of the year, at the actual calendar new year. And we've been building out the infrastructure. We've been understanding how everyone's opinions and thoughts work. And I think as you watch the season go on, you sort of watched a bunch of those lights and sort of start turning on as we start to understand how to better apply a lot of those principles across all of the different voices involved. And hopefully someone like James is the beginning of a lot of those types of players. But it was real exciting to watch him pitch.
A lot of people will talk about different sports. It's an imitation league. The NFL gets that one a lot. Somebody has success and everybody imitates it. How much can you reverse engineer, and say, okay, this team's having this success. This is what they're doing. How much, can you just, get in the minds of the other clubs and figure out what you can take and be better at here with the Royals?
Well, I always think that it comes down to two different things. One of them is being able to have a critical mind, right? Being able to look at your own processes and say, we think these players like this shouldn't have this sort of success, or a team built like this shouldn't have this sort of success. We're clearly being given a counter example to it, instead of us being very close-minded to assuming that that's a fluke. It's having the critical mind to say, okay, what are they doing? That's really probably the most stunning way of doing that. The other one is probably getting more comfortable with sort of the experimental method a little bit and having people that are open-minded to execute that. I think I go to the two-man outfield as a particular example where, we were trying to understand how to maybe better counter the shift if it needed to be countered. We knew that the research out there was, pointed slightly in one direction. We still had buy-in from Q and the major league staff to try it. We tried it in a few examples. I think we probably would have gotten really burned if Corey Seager hadn't blown out his hamstring running there for a little bit. We might have accidentally cost him the MVP, but the side effect of that was we got a chance to explore and learn a little bit and realize that it wasn't as big of a win as we thought it might be. It's hard to put yourself out there on something like that, I think, right? Because when it goes wrong, everybody can see it. But still having an opportunity and a staff that's open-minded to try it kind of gave us that shot.
Yeah, I mean, I think on some level, you are handicapped just by the fact that the history of the organization, people are not willing necessarily to give the Royals the benefit of the doubt. And I think it's something that I personally have struggled with. Something you can track on the history of this show is, when the organization does something different? Is this the Royals being same old Royals, or is this, wait a minute, they're actually trying something new, trying something creative, and maybe it didn't work, but what we care about is that you're willing to to try new ideas. And I'd rather a new idea that, like you said, I remember with the two-man outfield. I mean, ultimately, I don't think it hurt or helped. Like it was an experiment. It was interesting, but the fact that the organization was willing to try it was a sign to me, at least, that this is not the same organization that I've been used to for the last 15 years.
I obviously, because I went to Notre Dame and I was a Notre Dame fan before that, I have an intense emotional fandom that is tied to that university. Mm-hmm. So I can understand when things don't go right, and that's happened this year, what it means to like have to critically look at how you feel or what you think, because I want to follow it as rationally as I possibly can. But at the end of the day, rooting for wins and losses strips that away from you. It does for front office people in the moment too, right? Like we're rooting for an outcome, but I think the real upside for me personally, and having been here for 10 years, is I've gotten to be able to maybe appreciate why that's a hard thing for a fan base. And so we still have to go out there and try things and sort of live with the consequences.
How much of like we talk about all the young guys that are willing to buy in, and we've seen great stories like, numerous guys that have changed their swing and created more lift and uppercut, and they've become, Jose Batistas and guys that have done that. Like Eric Hosmer's one. Like I thought for sure, like, this is where I'm coming back to your point about trying the two-man outfield. When he got the big contract in San Diego, I thought, okay, here we go. He's going to start lifting the baseball, because now he doesn't have to worry about, if I lose a few numbers, it's going to ding me on what I'm going to get. He's got the biggest contract he's ever going to get. And he's got 7 years to perfect a swing that can maybe get him the contract at the end and give him, and he never did. Right. And to your point, I think that's what's impressive in what you guys did is, here's a guy who had all the security in the world and could take the opportunity to make himself better. He clearly needs to lift the baseball more, right? And now he's out of the game. I think he's still out of the game. I don't know. Maybe he'll be back in a spring training. But he wasn't willing to try something different because it's something he would always hold on to. Michael Lewis wrote about this in the New Yorker piece he wrote as kind of a follow-up to Moneyball, where he talked about how players revert back to what they've always known. They might try it, but the moment they find any resistance, they immediately stop and go back to what has been the most comfortable for them. The fact that you guys tried that, to me, is a tremendous positive, right? I know what Rany said, like there's probably, when you're down, now you were also just one of the more successful franchises a few years ago and going to back-to-back World Series. But to me, that's where you have to be, right? If you're not out on the edge, and if you're not trying new things, you're not going to get to where you want to go.
Well, it cuts both ways. When it works, you all of a sudden you become a visionary, or you've changed the game on some level. It's about understanding how to not to come back to the phrase, but mitigate the risk a little bit, right? That's why we didn't run the two-man outfield with everybody that could pull the baseball, because if you do it with really fast guys, they're going to end up on third if anything wrong or bad happens there. But at the same time, we wanted to be able to give ourselves a chance to try something new. And players that have had success at the major league level in any form, they are going to be risk adverse because they want to stick around. They want to stay there. And once you make money, it's also a bit of a positive reinforcement to whatever behavior you've been doing, because that's what no one gets paid after 6 years of control purely based off of potential. Right. It's a game where you get paid for what you've done, almost, not what you're about to do. Right. That's where the real value is found. So I think that's also the hard thing, because players are going to want to do what they've been doing. That's what helped them get there. That's why you have to start young.
Yeah.
Right. I want to ask maybe about one specific. I obviously I know there's a limit to what you can tell us, but there's one specific thing. You talk about one of the biggest success stories of this season, and something where I will happily admit that I was wrong about, and that's specifically the case of Bobby Witt's infield defense. All right, because last year, the defensive metrics, and now part of I think the story here is that the defensive metrics vary from one defensive metric to another. I mean, some of the metrics said that he was just unplayably bad at shortstop. Some of the other ones just said he was below average. But I don't think any of the metrics would have said that this guy is an above average defensive shortstop in 2022. To the point where I thought that a position change should be considered. And the metrics, in addition to the eye test, but the metrics this year were completely different. Now the metrics range from, okay, he's average to he's a Gold Glover. He might be the best defensive shortstop in the league. But clearly he made a substantial defensive improvement this year. And I know, Jose Aguasil was hired in the offseason and has gotten a lot of credit for improving, the infield defense, not just Bobby Witt, but obviously Michael Garcia learning how to play third base, kind of on the fly, Michael Massey at second base. But I'm curious if what you could tell us about from your perspective, did you have internal metrics saying that he was a lot better than what the public domain thought about his defense last year? Or was it a matter of, yes, he wasn't playing well, but it was a specific issue that could be fixed, and that's what led to his improvement this year? I'm just very curious, this one specific improvement, because that's how a team finds success, is you find weaknesses and you turn them into strengths. So I'm curious if you can tell us anything at all about that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give a lot of credit initially to both Bobby and Jose, because that's the type of work ethic, and the sport writers can go on and on about work ethic and showing up when no one's watching, and Bobby's obviously probably a pinnacle example of that for someone his age, and Jose is relentless at being positive and being progressive in how he wants to help the position players, and being able to help meet Bobby there to do that. I think there's a lot to that. The things that I think we would go back to is knowing some of the things that we look at in terms of just like physical movement that leads you to believe that someone is still capable of playing that position at a high level. And when you start to take out because defensive metrics are highly volatile as well, right? Not only do they differ from point to point, DRS, UZR, whatever, savants, outs above and their own infield map models, but they're also very volatile from year to year. And I think a lot of that has to do with sampling too, right? You don't get the same sample of ground balls to a position every single year. You might only get a couple of a certain type, and how you perform sometimes is kind of out of your control. But if you can keep putting someone that moves the way Bobby moves in that position, and he's putting in the kind of work that he's putting in on a rep by rep basis, I think you see that kind of improvement, and you're just genuinely happy that it's coming through almost the most sports cliche like way, but it's honestly, it was awesome to sort of watch his process-based metrics bear out his practice.
We're talking with Daniel Mack, heads up the analytics department for the Kansas City Royals. We're brought to you by Gan Asphalt and Concrete. Leave a great first and last impression with clients, with customers, with a smooth and well laid out parking lot. Gan Asphalt and Concrete has been doing that for businesses. You focus on your business. They'll make sure that the first impression you give to anyone that enters your business and the last impression you leave is one of an organized, smart company. Do it right now by going to Gan Asphalt and Concrete's website, ganasphalt.com. Is that to say, on your point about, the way he moves, that I think that's the way you kept describing it. We used to quantify athleticism with a stopwatch, right? There were some things that you could do. Can you now quantify athleticism with all the different cameras and motion and everything? Can we completely quantify an athlete who is more athletic, who has more upside? Is that now something that even that part of it, the what was just the eye test, is now all numbers?
Well, I definitely think the advent of the way Hawkeye tracks helps a ton with that. Our performance science department also has built over the last 5-6 years an incredible assessment process that's fairly data driven in its own right, to help understand what athletes generally are capable or not capable of in terms of mobility, in terms of, their ability to sprint, things of that nature that give us a lot more insight into what they may be capable of during their minor league careers. So it's a little bit of both in that case. Obviously, we don't get to do that with other teams' players, so you have to be using some of our process-based measurements to look at other teams and kind of scout from a data perspective.
Well, on that subject of scouting other teams, how does your department approach things like trades and free agency? Like, what kind of input do you have in terms of the front office in scouting those players outside the organization? I mean, a great example, a pinnacle example, maybe would be trading for Cole Reagans this summer. We talked about James McArthur, but really, if you're talking about the pinnacle of the new Royals process, as I'd like to call it right now, it's taking a guy who was a fringe major leaguer. People weren't sure what he was going to be. They thought he'd be a major leaguer at some capacity. And a month after he was acquired by the organization, he had a new pitch. His cutter, I think had improved, and he was dropped into a major league rotation. Was one of the best starters in baseball for the last 2 months of the season. So I'm curious if you could give us any insight into what your department's input is into acquire. Are you constantly looking at like the data that you have and saying, going to JJ and be like, there's this player in this organization that his numbers may not be great, but he's a guy we definitely want to get as a second or third player in a deal that might have some untapped upside. I'm curious how that goes.
Well, yeah, I've been very lucky to be in a lot of those conversations for the last several years. One of the things that I really stress myself is pre-trade organization, right? I mean, not like we knew we were going to make that deal, but a lot of our infrastructure is based on making sure that we have ready to go lists, ready to go ways of processing a team's organization, or an organization's prospects, to try and find interesting matches that we know are both feasible and produce, various amounts of upside and now type, belief, right? And it's something that we've dedicated a ton of time to. I've had 2 to 3 analysts at any point in the last few years helping with that organization, with our restructuring that we've been beginning to go through in terms of pro player acquisition. We're going to dedicate analysts directly to that, so they aren't sort of Swiss Army knifing their way through R&D, which they've all done a great job doing that. But I think going back to the bandwidth component, once you allow someone to focus on those types of concepts and acquisitions, that's how you can really dig into a system completely and really find the second and third piece, but also understand what good blueprints for deals look like to begin with. And that's important to us. And that's been, to give credit where credit is due, that goes almost all the way back. That does go all the way back to Mike Rootman and John Williams, right? Some of the foundational ways in which they thought about these things obviously informed me greatly, and they inform a lot about how our processes have evolved over time. It's kind of cool when I think about it like that.
Daniel, we don't want to keep you all night. I think we could, though, keep you all night and keep pestering you with questions. I do want to ask you this, and I asked you something similar when we were on the radio back in the summer. I think one of the big mistakes that everybody makes in sports is they look around and they believe that the sport has arrived. It is where it is, and it will go no further. They know all the progressions that came to get to today, but today we're at where we were always going, and we have now reached the end. And this is how the sport will be played forever and ever, right? That's the mistake that I think organizations make. I think as fans, we think of it that way because we don't have to try to find what's over the horizon. You do, right? Like if you could be the first one to figure it out and find the underappreciated value in something, that's what gets you ahead. That's what leaps you forward. Where are analytics going? Where are baseball analytics going? What is the next step in your mind?
So the way I like to think about a lot of things in baseball, a lot of baseball problems, is just sort of the evolution of how we've uncovered why things we observe while we're watching the game, even as a fan, have kind of begin, right? And so the genesis of every statistic, right? From a purely analytical perspective. So you think of a strikeout, that really happened because there was swing and miss. That happened because there was chase. So now we get a little bit closer, right? We uncover the data points that lead up to the strikeout. But why was there a swing and miss, right? What caused that? Well, we know a lot more about how the pitch moves. So now we can understand that the pitch carried a certain amount of weight in why the strikeout happened. But now we're getting a little bit closer because of the higher frame rate cameras to understand more about hitter mechanics, but not just hitter mechanics in the sense that you're videotaping a batter from the side, but we know how their swing changes when a pitch like that happens in a certain part of the zone. So now we understand that the swing, how much of that swing and miss was related to the hitter versus the pitcher they were facing, and how susceptible they are in that circumstance. So we get a lot closer to the actual process of the physical motion and what it means to the outcome we see. And I think analytics getting a lot closer to understanding how those matchups truly happen is how you get even closer to better lineups for particular games, or even understanding what types of pitchers you might need to carry in even a playoff series, right? In a divisional series where it's a best of 5, if you know how those hitter swings truly work, and you have to pull your 40 man together to find the right 26, you're going to pull the right 13 pitchers that take advantage of those hitters the most. And I think that's really kind of an exciting concept when I really think about it from sort of the 30,000 foot view.
I love the optimism that you're already thinking about how the Royals are going to put together their playoff roster, Daniel. That's we're going to hold you to that.
But I'm excited with the concept that at some point, all of the analysts that I have will have an opportunity to experience the joy I experienced in 14 and 15. Like, that drives me probably more than anything else.
And are you excited with the organizational approach? I mean, John, it starts at the top, right? And John Sherman is a guy that comes from the Guardians who clearly value what it is you do. John values it. You can hear it in what he talks about and what he sees. The hires, as Rany, we started out talking about it. He pointed out the hires that have been made. I mean, do you feel like this organization is on track to understanding, being able to use what it is you do and everything else that's out there, that everyone's rowing in the same direction, that the organization is building towards being back in that, being back in the postseason and sustaining it?
Absolutely. From John to JJ to Scott Sharp, I think there's a ton of optimism about how even growth in my department is going to positively impact the organization. Sometimes we all have a tendency to get a little skeptical that it's growth for growth's sake. I know that our ownership group doesn't feel that way. I know our general manager doesn't feel that way. I know our senior vice president in Major League Operations doesn't feel that way. Like, we are prepared to build more pieces of information to help us make better decisions along the way. And that truly helps me make sure that I'm excited to put my feet on the ground every morning. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. It's what we want to hear. I mean, I think everybody, we're all Royals fans, right? And we're certainly excited. I love talking to you back in the summer. Love talking to you here tonight and hearing everything that's going on. And we love seeing the victories, right? Like, and I don't necessarily mean the wins and losses. Cole Reagans, Velasquez, we're seeing tangible signs that good decisions are being made, right? And I think that's exciting. Now all you have to do is tell us we'll be in the playoffs in what year?
First question, I think I'm going to have to pass on just for everybody's sake.
I asked that to JJ one year, and God bless him. It was in spring training, and he was like, I think. I was like, you probably shouldn't have answered that one. That's one you don't want to put to. People tend to hold you to those numbers. So there it is. Daniel Mack proving he's an incredibly intelligent individual as well. Knowing not to put a number on that is quite wise. But we do all feel like things are going in the right direction. A lot of work to be done, right? A lot of work to be
100%.
done. But definitely going in the right direction with a lot of people that are certainly eager to get to work on all the things that need to be done. So that's great. Rany, anything you want to wrap with before we let Daniel get back to his life?
No, I mean, that's a lot to chew on. It was a, very illuminating conversation. I will say, the fact that you said you're hiring 6 or 7 new positions in the analytics department this winter. I mean, how many times, Soren, have you and I over the last year talked about, the Royals spending money? It's like, they could spend money by hiring a half dozen analysts, and we just heard it from the head of the department. So that might be the single most positive takeaway from this conversation. That to hear that is just another another sign that the Royals are heading in the right direction.
And investing.
If I'm not good at being patient. I've demonstrated that many times on this podcast, but that there definitely are green shoots in the ground.
Well, and listen, I hope all your people are very finely paid and everything like that. But I'll bet they collectively, all the new positions, all make less than Jacob deGrom. These are the types of investments that will add up for sure as far as the bottom line goes. But have the ability to really, we can look at what the Rays have done with their analysis that it can pay, many times over. What the investment is. And so it is great to see the Royals investing in that because there's no going backwards, right? Like not in your department. It's only forward. So it is great. And we love seeing it. Now, if you could just tell us where the stadium will go, when it will be built, then we'll have all the answers we need.
I think he'd rather give you a year on the playoffs.
I'm pretty sure I would too.
We will save that for someone else. We'll pester when Mr. Sherman comes on the podcast. We'll pester Mr. Sherman about
Sounds like a good idea.
Seriously, Daniel, we really appreciate the time. I do always love talking to you. You're a wealth of information, certainly for the organization, but even for us as well. So thanks for giving up a bunch of your time for us and all the Royals fans out there. Keep doing what you're doing, and we look forward to the big champagne celebrations when they happen.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate being on. Thank you.
You bet. There he is. Daniel Mack does a fantastic job for the Kansas City Royals. And Rany, will wrap with this. I mean, anything you didn't like, anything, particularly jumped out at you is the biggest thing?
No, I mean, there's certainly nothing Daniel said I disagreed with. I mean, this is so he definitely gave me some insight in areas that I hadn't considered, but where he brought up ideas that you and I have discussed. I think we're very much on the same wavelength. The one thing that I thought was very interesting, and I'm purely speculating here, but when he talked about using data in the draft to figure out which players make really good decisions about when to swing, the image of Blake Mitchell's stat line popped into my head. And I know he didn't hit, but the 14 walks in like 11 games, Daniel might still be listening in and he might be smiling right now, but I just have a feeling. Let's just say I'm very, very interested to see what a full season of Blake Mitchell will be because, yes, walks by themselves are not the point of the game, but making smart decisions about swinging, when to swing, is still the foundation for success. And it's really good to hear, somebody very high up in the Royals organization who agrees with me that the organization needs to focus more on plate discipline and walks, not just for the walks, but because what that unlocks for an offense.
Yeah, he said he's definitely on the team on base percentage, which we knew he would be, right? That's not shocking, but I think it's so good for fans to hear that there is a guy that's up there at the top of the food chain that is definitely preaching that part of the equation. And listen, Bobby Wood Jr. got better at it this year. They're clearly doing something right along those lines. And it was great to hear him also acknowledge, hey, Bobby Wood works really hard. There's still the hard work equation. It's not just the math.
Absolutely.
Guys got to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And he pointed that out as well. Listen, speaking of success, if you want a successful first impression with your business, call our friends at Gan Asphalt and Concrete. You know it, nationally recognized. Been fixing parking lot problems since 1994. A brightly striped lot can cut down on liability, accidents, problems. That allows you to focus on your business. Let Gan Asphalt and Concrete do what they've been doing in Kansas City for 30 years. Fix your parking lot problems. Gan Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Find them online at ganasphalt.com. First of all, Dr. Daniel Mack, the VP and Assistant General Manager for the Kansas City Royals for Research and Development, and for Dr. Rany Jazayerli was outnumbered 2-1 on the doctors tonight.
Mhm.
That's for sure. We say thank you very much for joining us here on Kauffman Corner.